The iron cuffs bit into Maeve Wilson's wrists as the prison wagon jolted across the uneven terrain of the Wyoming Territory in 1875. Her crime defending herself against the unwanted advances of a prominent businessman's son had earned her a one-way ticket to the women's workhouse in Cheyenne. Tears streamed down her face, not from the pain of the shackles, but from the injustice of it all. At 22, her life shouldn't be ending this way. "Keep quiet in there," shouted the driver, a gruff man with tobacco-stained teeth who seemed to take pleasure in her misery. "We've got another day's ride before we reach Cheyenne, and I ain't in the mood for no woman's wailing." Maeve bit her lip and stared out through the iron bars of the wagon's small window. The vast landscape of the Wyoming Territory stretched before her endless plains, rolling hills, and in the distance, the majestic silhouette of mountains. In another circumstance, she might have found beauty in it. Now, it was merely the backdrop to her doom. The wagon followed a winding trail alongside a creek, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the path. Maeve closed her eyes, trying to find some comfort in the gentle rocking motion, when suddenly the wagon jerked to a violent halt, nearly throwing her from the bench. "What in tarnation?" the driver yelled. "Who the hell are you?" Maeve scrambled to her feet, peering through the small window. A lone rider had positioned himself directly in the wagon's path. Even from her limited view, Maeve could see he cut an imposing figure atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but his posture spoke of confidence and determination. "That's far enough," the stranger called out, his voice deep and commanding. "Step down from the wagon. Nice and slow." The driver reached for his shotgun. "You best move along, mister. This here's official business." The crack of a gunshot split the air, and the driver's shotgun went flying from his hands. "I won't ask again," the stranger said, his pistol now aimed directly at the driver. With reluctance, the driver climbed down from his perch, hands raised in surrender. The second guard, who had been dozing in the passenger seat, followed suit, cursing under his breath. Maeve heard boots crunching on gravel as the stranger approached the wagon. The key turned in the lock and the door swung open. For the first time, she got a clear look at her unexpected interruption, tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. His jawline was strong, partially covered by a short, well-kept beard. Despite the dust of the trail, there was something refined about him, a hint that he wasn't just another rough-hewn frontierman. He climbed into the wagon, spurs jingling with each step. Without a word, he knelt before her and examined the chains binding her wrists and ankles. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Maeve," she replied cautiously. "Maeve Wilson." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Then, from his belt, he produced a set of tools and began working on her shackles. "I'm Caleb," he said as he worked. "Caleb Preston." Within minutes, the restraints fell away. Maeve rubbed her raw wrists, relief flooding through her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, unable to comprehend why a stranger would risk so much for her. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. Then, gathering the fallen chains in his hand, he tossed them out of the wagon door. "Because," he said firmly, his gaze never leaving hers, "you belong to me." Before Maeve could process his startling declaration, he took her hand and helped her down from the wagon. The two guards stood nearby, looking nervous. "You can't do this," the driver protested. "She's a convicted criminal. There'll be a warrant." "Then I suggest you start running," Caleb interrupted coldly. "Because if I see you again, I won't be so merciful." He led Maeve to his horse, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle before mounting behind her. With a final warning glance at the guards, he urged his horse forward, leaving the wagon and its occupants behind. As they rode away, Maeve's mind raced with questions and fears. Who was this man? What did he mean by saying she belonged to him? Had she escaped one prison only to find herself in another? The horse maintained a steady pace, putting distance between them and the prison wagon. Maeve sat stiffly in front of Caleb, acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. The terrain changed as they rode, moving from open plains to more wooded areas. "Where are you taking me?" Maeve finally asked, breaking the tense silence between them. "Somewhere safe," Caleb replied, his voice close to her ear. Those men will report what happened. We need to get you far away from here." "And then what?" she pressed. "What did you mean back there? I don't belong to anyone." She felt him sigh, his chest expanding against her back. "It's complicated, Miss Wilson. I promise I'll explain everything when we're not in immediate danger of being pursued." They rode for what felt like hours, the landscape bathed in the golden hues of sunset before darkness began to settle. Eventually, Caleb guided the horse off the main trail and into a densely wooded area. After navigating through trees and underbrush, they emerged in a small clearing where a modest cabin stood. "We'll stay here tonight," Caleb said, dismounting and then helping Maeve down. "It belongs to a friend who won't mind us using it." The cabin was simple, but well-maintained, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and basic supplies. Caleb quickly set about lighting a lantern and starting a fire in the stove. Maeve stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do. Her situation had changed so rapidly that she felt disoriented. Hours ago, she'd been a prisoner headed for a life of hard labor. Now, she was free of chains, but in the company of a mysterious man who had made an unsettling claim over her. "You must be hungry," Caleb said, rummaging through some supplies. "There's not much here, but we can make a decent meal." "I want answers first," Maeve insisted, finding her voice. "Why did you rescue me? How did you even know I would be on that wagon? And what exactly did you mean when you said I belonged to you?" Caleb paused in his task, turning to face her fully. In the warm glow of the lantern, his features seemed softer, less intimidating than they had been on the trail. "I've been tracking that prison wagon for 2 days, he explained. "I knew it was transporting a woman to Cheyenne, but I didn't know it would be you specifically." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that hinted at his own inner turmoil. "As for what I said, it was the quickest way to establish authority in that situation. I needed those guards to believe I had a legitimate claim on you." "A claim?" Maeve repeated incredulously. "Like I'm property to be traded?" "No," Caleb shook his head firmly. "That's not what I meant. But in this territory, a woman alone is vulnerable. I needed a reason those men would understand for why I was taking you." Maeve crossed her arms, unconvinced. "So, it was just a ruse? You don't actually believe I belong to you?" "I believe you belong to yourself, Miss Wilson," Caleb said quietly. "But the world we live in doesn't always respect that view." There was a sincerity in his voice that made Maeve want to believe him, but years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. "Why go to all this trouble for a stranger?" Caleb turned back to the stove, avoiding her gaze. "Let's just say I have my reasons for opposing the justice system in these parts. I've seen too many innocent people suffer at its hands." He began preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon, and the familiar domestic activity created an odd sense of normalcy in their extraordinary situation. Hunger eventually won out over Maeve's hesitation, and she moved closer to the warmth of the stove. "Were you really convicted of a crime?" Caleb asked as he stirred the beans. Maeve's jaw tightened. "According to the court, yes. I assaulted Harold Blackburn, son of Judge Blackburn in Laramie. What they conveniently ignored was that I was defending myself from his unwanted advances." Her voice grew bitter. "Apparently, a seamstress should be flattered by the attention of such an esteemed gentleman, not fight back when he tries to force himself on her." Caleb's expression darkened. "The Blackburns. I might have known they'd be involved." "You know them?" Maeve asked, surprised. "I know of them," he replied carefully. "Judge Blackburn has a reputation for bending the law to suit his interests. And his son—" He trailed off, a muscle working in his jaw. "Well, you're not the first woman he's troubled." They ate in relative silence, the weight of their circumstances hanging between them. After the meal, Caleb insisted Maeve take the bed, while he would sleep on a bedroll near the door. "We'll need to leave at first light," he explained as he spread out his bedding. "Head further into the mountains where it's harder to track us." Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, still struggling to comprehend the rapid changes in her fate. "And then what? I can't keep running forever?" Caleb looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I have connections in Colorado, people who can help get you set up with a new identity, a fresh start somewhere the Blackburns can't reach you." "Why would you do all this for me?" Maeve asked again, searching his face for answers. For a moment, Caleb seemed on the verge of revealing something important. Then he simply said, "Get some rest, Miss Wilson. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." As Maeve lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the gentle crackle of the dying fire and Caleb's steady breathing across the room, she found herself at a crossroads of trust. Her instincts told her that despite his gruff exterior and cryptic motivations, Caleb Preston was not a threat to her. But experience had taught her that men rarely acted without self-interest. What was his true purpose in rescuing her? And what would happen when that purpose was fulfilled? Dawn broke with a chill in the air, streams of pale light filtering through the cabin's single window. Maeve awoke to find Caleb already up and moving about quietly, preparing coffee and a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit. "We need to move," he said when he noticed she was awake. "I've packed some supplies, but we can't take much. Speed is more important than comfort right now." Maeve nodded, pushing aside the blanket and rising to her feet. She was still wearing the plain gray dress she'd been given for transport to the workhouse, now wrinkled and dusty from their journey. Caleb seemed to notice her discomfort because he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle of fabric. "It's not much," he said, handing it to her. "Just a spare shirt and some riding pants. They'll be too big, but they'll be better for traveling than that dress." Maeve accepted the clothes gratefully. Caleb respectfully turned his back, busying himself with final preparations while she changed. The clothes were indeed too large, but after using a length of rope as a belt and rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, she felt more comfortable than she had in days. They ate quickly, and within minutes of finishing, they were outside. Caleb saddled his horse with practiced efficiency, then helped Maeve mount before swinging up behind her. "We'll follow the creek up into the mountains," he explained as they set off. "The water will help mask our trail, and the terrain gets rough enough that most pursuers would think twice about following." The day passed in a blur of changing landscapes. From the wooded area around the cabin, they followed the winding creek uphill, eventually reaching higher elevations, where pine trees grew dense and the air became crisper. Caleb proved to be an expert navigator, occasionally dismounting to check for signs of pursuit or to give the horse a rest. During one such break, as they sat on sun-warmed rocks by the creek, Maeve finally gathered the courage to press for more answers. "You never really explained why you're helping me," she said, watching him refill their canteens in the clear mountain water. "You mentioned opposing the justice system, but this seems personal." Caleb paused, water dripping from the canteen in his hand. For a long moment, he stared at the flowing creek, as if searching for words in its current. "4 years ago," he began slowly, "my younger sister Rose was in a situation similar to yours. She caught the eye of a powerful man's son. When she rejected him, he didn't take it well." His voice grew tight. "She was found guilty of theft, a crime she didn't commit, and sent to a women's prison in Montana Territory." Maeve felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What happened to her?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "She died there. Pneumonia, they said. But when I finally tracked down another woman who'd been released from that place, she told me Rose had been mistreated by the guards, repeatedly. She got sick afterward and was denied proper care." "I'm so sorry," Maeve whispered, understanding blooming within her. "After that, I made it my mission to intercept prison transports when I can, especially when they're carrying women convicted in courts where I know corruption runs deep." He finally looked at her. His blue eyes filled with a mixture of old pain and new determination. "When I heard about a young woman being sent to Cheyenne from Laramie, with Judge Blackburn's name on the sentencing papers, I knew I had to act." The pieces were falling into place for Maeve. "So, when you said I belonged to you?" "It was the quickest way to establish a claim those guards would respect," Caleb confirmed. "In these territories, a woman can be claimed by a male relative or a husband. It's not right, but it's how things work. I needed them to believe I had a legitimate reason to take you." Relief washed over Maeve, followed by a new kind of admiration for the man before her. "You risk a lot doing this." "Some risks are worth taking," he replied simply, capping the canteens and standing. "We should keep moving." They continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered, dark and threatening. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Caleb led them toward a rocky overhang. "We'll shelter here until it passes," he said, helping Maeve dismount. "The storm looks bad, but it'll help wash away any tracks we've left." They huddled under the natural shelter as the rain intensified, turning into a powerful mountain storm. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by booming thunder that echoed through the valleys. Despite the protection of the overhang, the wind drove rain toward them, and they were soon pressed close together, seeking warmth. "This reminds me of home," Maeve said, raising her voice to be heard over the storm. "I grew up in West Virginia, in the mountains. My father was a coal miner. When storms came through, they would shake the whole house." "What brought you out west?" Caleb asked, seemingly glad for the conversation to distract from their uncomfortable situation. "My parents died in a mining accident when I was 17, she explained, the familiar pain of loss softened by time. "I had an aunt in Laramie who took me in. She taught me to sew, and eventually, I opened my own small shop." Her expression darkened. "Things were going well until Harold Blackburn decided I caught his fancy." Caleb nodded in understanding. "The Blackburns own half the businesses in Laramie. They're not used to hearing no." "Well, Harold heard it from me," Maeve said with a flash of defiance. "Several times, but he kept coming around, making suggestions, touching me when no one was looking. Then one day, he cornered me in the back room of my shop." She swallowed hard. "I grabbed my scissors and told him to leave. He laughed and tried to take them from me. In the struggle, he got cut not badly, just a scratch on his arm." "But you'd have thought I tried to murder him the way he carried on." "And his father made sure you paid for that insult," Caleb concluded grimly. 3 years in the women's workhouse," Maeve confirmed. "My shop was seized to pay damages to the Blackburn family." The rain continued to pound around them, but in their sheltered corner, a different kind of atmosphere had developed, one of shared understanding and growing trust. For the first time since her arrest, Maeve felt truly seen and heard. As darkness fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Caleb made a difficult decision. "We can't travel in this. We'll have to spend the night here." He managed to create a small, sheltered fire using dry wood he found deeper under the overhang. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock wall behind them as they huddled close for warmth. From his saddlebag, Caleb produced jerky and hard biscuits, not a feast, but enough to quiet their hunger. "Tell me about your sister," Maeve said softly as they ate. "What was she like?" A small smile touched Caleb's lips, the first genuine smile Maeve had seen from him. "Rose was bright. That's the word that always comes to mind. Bright smile, bright mind. She could recite poetry from memory and taught herself to play the fiddle just by listening to others." His voice grew wistful. "She was only 19 when she died." "She sounds wonderful," Maeve said gently. "She was lucky to have a brother who loved her so much." "Not lucky enough," Caleb replied, the smile fading. "I was away when she was arrested, working as a guide for some Eastern businessmen who wanted to hunt in the mountains. By the time I got back and learned what had happened, she'd already been transported to Montana." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying. "I've always wondered if I could have prevented it if I'd been there." "You can't blame yourself," Maeve insisted. "The Blackburns of the world, they're the ones responsible." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her face. "You remind me of her sometimes. That same fire, that refusal to be broken." The compliment warmed Maeve more than the fire before them. In the dancing light, with rain creating a curtain around their small haven, she saw Caleb not as the intimidating figure who had confronted the prison wagon, but as a man carrying both strength and sorrow. "What will you do?" she asked. "After you've helped me get to Colorado?" "Continue my work, I suppose," he replied. "There are always more prison wagons, more corrupt judges, more innocent people who need help." "It sounds lonely," Maeve observed. Caleb shrugged. "I've gotten used to it." But Maeve wondered if anyone truly got used to loneliness. She certainly hadn't, in the years since losing her parents. Even in Laramie, surrounded by customers and acquaintances, she'd felt the ache of deep solitude. The fire burned low, and exhaustion began to claim them both. Caleb insisted Maeve take his bedroll while he kept watch. But as the night deepened and the storm continued its assault, they found themselves drifting closer together for warmth. Maeve fell asleep with her head resting against Caleb's shoulder, his arm protectively around her. For the first time since her arrest, she slept without fear. Morning brought clear skies and a landscape transformed by the storm. Water dripped from leaves and rocks, creating a symphony of gentle percussion around them. Maeve awoke to find herself still nestled against Caleb, who appeared to have dozed off despite his intention to keep watch. For a moment, she remained still, studying his face in repose. Without the tension and wariness that usually marked his expression, he looked younger, almost peaceful. His eyes suddenly opened, instantly alert, and Maeve quickly sat up, embarrassed to be caught staring. "The storm's past," she said unnecessarily, gesturing to the bright sky visible beyond their shelter. Caleb nodded, standing and stretching his tall frame. "Good. We can make better time today." They set out after a quick breakfast, the horse picking its way carefully over the rain-soaked ground. The storm had indeed washed away their tracks, but it had also made the terrain more treacherous. Several times they had to dismount and lead the horse around mudslides or swollen streams. By midday they had crossed the highest part of their route and begun descending toward a valley that Caleb explained would lead them eventually to Colorado. The landscape was breathtaking, towering pines, meadows dotted with wildflowers, and in the distance snow-capped peaks standing sentinel against the blue sky. "It's beautiful," Maeve breathed, taking in the vista during one of their rest stops. "This is one of the reasons I became a guide," Caleb admitted. "Few people get to see the mountains like this. Most just want to get through them as quickly as possible, or exploit them for what they're worth." "Is that what you did before Rose?" Maeve asked carefully. Caleb nodded. "I guided hunting parties, survey teams, sometimes wealthy tourists who wanted to experience the frontier without any actual hardship." There was a hint of derision in his voice. "It was good money, and I enjoyed the solitude between jobs. And now? Now I still guide occasionally when I need funds, but I'm more selective about my clients." He looked at her with a hint of humor in his eyes. "Rich Easterners tend to talk a lot. You'd be surprised what you can learn about judicial corruption, prison transports, and the movements of powerful men when you're the silent guide everyone forgets is listening." Maeve smiled at this revelation. "So, that's how you get your information." "That, and a network of like-minded individuals throughout the territories," Caleb confirmed. "Former prisoners, relatives of those unjustly convicted. A few honest lawmen who can't fight the system openly, but will turn a blind eye to those who do." "It sounds like you've built something important," Maeve said with genuine admiration. Caleb looked momentarily taken aback by her praise, as if unused to having his efforts acknowledged. "It's not enough," he said finally. "For every person I help, there are dozens I can't reach." "But you try," Maeve insisted. "That matters." They continued their journey, the conversation flowing more easily between them now. Maeve told Caleb about her dreams of expanding her seamstress business into a proper dress shop, while he shared stories of the most beautiful places he'd discovered in his years of guiding. There was a growing comfort in their interactions, a sense of connection that surprised them both. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they approached a small settlement nestled in the valley, little more than a cluster of cabins, a trading post, and what appeared to be a saloon. "Willow Creek," Caleb explained. "Barely even a town, but a good place to resupply. The people here mind their own business, which makes it valuable for folks like us." They rode directly to the trading post, where Caleb purchased provisions, new clothes for Maeve that actually fit her, and fresh supplies for their continuing journey. The proprietor, a grizzled man with kind eyes, greeted Caleb by name, but asked no questions about his companion. "Martha's got rooms above the saloon if you're staying the night," the man mentioned as they completed their transaction. "Clean beds, hot water for washing. Might do you both good after trail living." Caleb glanced at Maeve, who tried to hide her eagerness at the thought of a proper bath and bed. "Thank you, Tom. We'll head there now." The saloon was a simple affair compared to those in larger towns, no fancy mirrors or polished brass, just solid wooden furniture and a bar stocked with basic spirits. A few local men nursed drinks in the corner, but otherwise the place was quiet. Martha, the proprietress, was a stout woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Caleb Preston," she said, looking him up and down. "Been a while since you passed through." "Business keeps me moving, Martha," he replied with a respectful nod. Martha's sharp eyes moved to Maeve, taking in her borrowed clothes and trail-worn appearance. And who might this be? Maeve Wilson, Caleb answered before Maeve could speak. My wife. Maeve barely managed to keep her surprise from showing on her face. Caleb gave her a meaningful look, and she quickly composed herself. Pleased to meet you, she said to Martha, forcing a smile. Martha looked between them, one eyebrow raised skeptically. Didn't know you'd taken a wife, Caleb. It was a recent development, he replied smoothly. We're heading to Colorado to start fresh. After a moment of scrutiny, Martha seemed to accept the explanation. Well, I've got one room available, includes a bath for the missus if she wants it. $2 for the night. We'll take it, Caleb said, counting out the money. Once they were alone in the simple but clean room, Maeve rounded on him. Your wife? Caleb had the grace to look slightly abashed. I apologize for not warning you, but it was necessary. A woman traveling alone with a man who's not her husband raises questions in places like this. Questions lead to gossip. Gossip leads to word spreading, and that could bring trouble down on us. Maeve understood the logic, even if the deception made her uncomfortable. You could have at least prepared me. You're right, he conceded. I should have, but you played along well. Years of pretending to be charmed by customers with terrible taste in fashion, she replied dryly, which earned her a chuckle from Caleb. True to Martha's word, a bath was prepared for Maeve, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed since before her arrest. Caleb respectfully left the room, mentioning he had business to attend to downstairs, giving her complete privacy. Sinking into the warm water, Maeve felt layers of grime and tension washing away. She used the soap provided to wash her hair and scrub her skin until it glowed pink. The new clothes Caleb had purchased, a practical but attractive blue calico dress, undergarments, and sturdy boots waited for her on the bed. By the time Caleb returned, she was dressed, her damp hair combed and beginning to dry in soft waves around her shoulders. He stopped in the doorway, momentarily caught off guard by her transformed appearance. You look, he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. Feeling better? Much, Maeve replied, noticing his hesitation with curious interest. Thank you for the clothes. They fit perfectly. Good, he said, closing the door behind him. I spoke with some folks downstairs. No word of any search parties in these parts, but it's best if we move on in the morning. We're still too close to Wyoming territory for comfort. Maeve nodded, reality intruding on her brief moment of normalcy. How much further to Colorado? 3 days' ride, maybe 4 depending on conditions, Caleb replied, setting his hat on a hook by the door. I have a contact in a town called Silver Peak. He can help arrange new identification papers for you, maybe even employment. The thought of starting over yet again filled Maeve with both hope and trepidation. And then, you'll move on to help someone else. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. That's how it works. I get people to safety, then continue the fight. Maeve turned away, suddenly finding the view from the small window fascinating. Of course, I understand. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and emerging feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. Martha's serving dinner downstairs. Nothing fancy, but it'll be hot and plentiful. I'd like that, Maeve said, turning back to him with a composed smile. The saloon had filled somewhat by the time they descended, mostly with local men stopping in for a drink and a meal after a day's work. Caleb kept a protective hand at the small of Maeve's back as he guided her to a table in the corner, positioning himself so he could see the door. Martha herself brought them plates of venison stew, cornbread, and mugs of coffee. You two make an odd pair, she commented bluntly, but I've seen stranger matches work out just fine. After she left, Maeve couldn't help but smile. She doesn't believe we're married. Martha's too smart to be fooled easily, Caleb agreed, breaking off a piece of cornbread. But she's also discreet. She won't cause us problems. They ate in comfortable silence, the simple food tasting better than any fine dining after days of trail rations. Occasionally, Maeve caught Caleb watching her, his expression thoughtful, almost tender, before he would quickly return his attention to his meal. For her part, Maeve found herself studying him more openly now. In the warm light of the saloon, with good food and relative safety, Caleb seemed less the hardened rescuer and more simply a man, one with strong hands that handled a fork as competently as they had freed her chains. with eyes that noticed everything but softened when they met hers, with a voice that could command respect from prison guards but also gentle when he spoke to her. As they finished their meal, the saloon door swung open, admitting a gust of cool evening air, and three men Maeve instantly recognized the driver and guard from the prison wagon, accompanied by a third man wearing a sheriff's badge. Caleb saw them too, his body tensing as he subtly shifted to block Maeve from their view. "Don't turn around," he murmured. "Stay calm." Heart pounding, Maeve kept her head down, grateful that her back was to the door. "How did they find us?" "They might not be looking for us specifically," Caleb replied quietly. "This is one of the few settlements in this area. They could be just passing through, asking questions." His hand moved to the gun at his hip. "If they recognize me, though, things could get complicated." The three men approached the bar, speaking to Martha in voices too low to hear from their table. Maeve watched Caleb's face for clues, seeing his expression grow more concerned as the conversation at the bar continued. "They're asking about a man and woman traveling together," he whispered. "Martha's telling them she hasn't seen anyone matching our description." Relief washed through Maeve, but it was short-lived. One of the men the driver turned from the bar, his gaze sweeping the room. When his eyes landed on their table, his expression changed from bored to alert. "That's him!" he exclaimed, pointing directly at Caleb. "And that's the prisoner." Everything happened at once. The sheriff reached for his gun, but Caleb was faster, overturning their table to create a barrier as he drew his own weapon. Maeve dropped to the floor as instructed, heart hammering in her chest. "Everyone stay calm," the sheriff called out, his gun trained on their position. "Preston, we know it's you. Come out with your hands up and bring the woman." "Not going to happen, Sheriff," Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "Miss Wilson was unjustly convicted. I'm not letting you take her back." "That's not for you to decide," the sheriff countered. "The law is the law." "The law is corrupt when Judge Blackburn's involved," Caleb shot back. "You know that as well as I do." A tense standoff ensued, with the other patrons scrambling for cover or fleeing the saloon entirely. Martha had disappeared behind the bar, though whether out of fear or to retrieve a weapon of her own was unclear. Maeve crouched behind the overturned table, mind racing. She couldn't let Caleb risk his life this way, not for her. There had to be another solution. "Caleb," she whispered urgently, "there must be another way out." "Back door through the kitchen," he replied without taking his eyes off the lawman. "But they'd see us make a run for it." "Unless they had a distraction," Maeve suggested, her gaze falling on a bottle of whiskey that had survived the table's overturning. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. With a quick nod, he shifted his position slightly. "On my signal, be ready to run." Maeve nodded, gathering her skirts in preparation. Caleb took aim not at the men, but at the oil lamp hanging above the bar. One shot, and the lamp exploded, sending burning oil across the bar top and creating instant chaos. In the same motion, he grabbed the whiskey bottle, smashed it against the floor, and set the spilled liquor alight with a dropped match. "Now!" he shouted, grabbing Maeve's hand and pulling her toward the kitchen as flames spread quickly across the wooden floor, creating a barrier between them and their pursuers. They burst through the kitchen and out the back door into the cool night air. Caleb led her directly to the stable behind the saloon, where their horse was already saddled. He had prepared for a quick escape, just in case. "Up you go," he said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "Hold on tight." They galloped away from the settlement as shouts and the glow of the fire filled the night behind them. Maeve clung to the saddle horn, her heart still racing from their narrow escape. "Will everyone be all right?" she asked, concerned about the fire they'd left behind. "The fire won't spread beyond the saloon," Caleb assured her. "There's a creek right behind it, and enough men to form a bucket brigade. Martha keeps barrels of water for just such emergencies." He guided the horse onto a narrow trail, leading back into the foothills. "I'm more concerned about us. They'll be after us as soon as they get that fire under control." They rode hard for several hours, using the light of the moon to navigate increasingly difficult terrain. Eventually, they reached a rocky area where the horse couldn't continue safely in the dark. "We'll rest here until dawn," Caleb decided, helping Maeve dismount. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she stumbled against him. His arms came around her automatically, steadying her, and for a moment, they stood close together in the moonlight. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his face just inches from hers. Maeve nodded, suddenly very aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hands on her arms, the way his eyes reflected the starlight. "Yes, thank you. For everything." Caleb seemed reluctant to release her, but finally stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should find shelter. There's a risk of rain again tonight." They found a small cave-like formation among the rocks, just deep enough to provide protection from the elements, but not so deep as to potentially harbor wildlife. Caleb wouldn't risk a fire that might be spotted by pursuers, so they huddled together for warmth, sharing the blanket from his saddlebag. "Will we still make it to Colorado?" Maeve asked as they settled into their makeshift shelter. "Yes, but we'll need to be more careful now," Caleb replied. "They know we're heading south. They'll likely send telegrams ahead to settlements along the main routes." "So we avoid settlements altogether?" "As much as possible," he confirmed. "It means rougher traveling, but it's safer." Maeve nodded, accepting this new reality. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, the soft nickering of the horse tethered nearby. "I'm sorry I've complicated your life," Maeve said finally. "You could have been killed back there." Caleb turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light. "You haven't complicated anything. I knew the risks when I decided to help you." "Why?" she pressed, needing to understand. "I know you told me about your sister, but there must be dozens of women in similar situations. Why risk everything for me specifically?" For a long moment, Caleb was silent, as if weighing his words carefully. "When I heard about your case, a seamstress defending herself against Harold Blackburn, it reminded me so much of Rose that I couldn't ignore it. But then, when I saw you in that wagon—" He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands. "There was something in your eyes, defiance even in chains. I knew then that you deserved a chance at freedom, whatever the cost." His honesty touched something deep within Maeve. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Thank you for seeing that in me, for believing in me when no one else did." Caleb's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Maeve's body that had nothing to do with the shared blanket. "We should try to get some sleep," Caleb said, his voice rougher than usual. "Dawn comes early, and we have difficult terrain ahead." But neither moved to break the connection between their hands, and when Maeve eventually drifted to sleep, it was with her head resting against Caleb's shoulder, their fingers still entwined. The morning brought a new determination. They set out at first light, Caleb leading the horse through rocky passages too treacherous to ride. The landscape grew increasingly wild as they deliberately veered away from established trails, following instead the natural contours of the land that would provide both cover and access to water. For 3 days, they traveled this way, riding when possible, walking when necessary, camping in hidden spots, and subsisting on their limited supplies and what Caleb could hunt. The shared hardship created a bond between them that deepened with each passing hour. Caleb taught Maeve wilderness skills, how to move silently through the forest, how to find edible plants, how to read the weather from cloud patterns. In turn, Maeve shared stories of her life before the arrest, her childhood in the mountains of West Virginia, her journey west after her parents' deaths, her dreams of creating beautiful dresses that would make women feel special. Caleb listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he valued her experiences and aspirations. By the third evening, as they made camp in a secluded meadow surrounded by aspen trees, Maeve realized with startling clarity that she had developed feelings for Caleb that went far beyond gratitude. The thought of reaching Colorado, of him helping her settle, and then riding away to continue his mission filled her with a sense of loss so acute it was almost physical. They sat by their small campfire after a dinner of rabbit stew, the night air cool around them. Fireflies danced at the meadow's edge, their soft lights mimicking the emerging stars above. "We should reach Silver Peak by tomorrow afternoon," Caleb said, breaking a comfortable silence. "My contact there, Henry, owns the local newspaper. He's arranged documentation for many people I've helped over the years." "And he'll do the same for me?" Maeve asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, despite the heaviness in her heart. "Yes, he's also mentioned there's a need for a skilled seamstress in town. The mining boom has brought prosperity, and the wives of successful mine owners want fashionable clothes without having to order them from Denver. Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, not meeting her eyes. You could build a good life there. Alone, Maeve said softly, unable to keep the word from escaping. Caleb looked up then, his expression conflicted. Maeve... I understand, she said quickly, embarrassed by her slip. You have important work to do. I don't expect you to abandon that for me. It's not that simple, Caleb replied, setting aside the stick and shifting closer to her. These past days with you, they've meant more to me than I can explain. Maeve's breath caught in her throat as he reached out to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I haven't allowed myself to think about a normal life since Rose died, he continued, his voice low and intense. My focus has been on helping others escape injustice, on trying to balance the scales in some small way. But being with you has reminded me of what it feels like to connect with someone, to share more than just a mission. Caleb, Maeve whispered, leaning into his touch. I don't want to be just another person you've helped. I don't want to say goodbye when we reach Silver Peak. In the flickering firelight, his blue eyes darkened with emotion. I don't want that either. The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Then, with aching slowness, Caleb leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to Maeve's eyes. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. I've been fighting against losing you since the moment I found you, he confessed, telling myself it was better this way, safer for you if I moved on. But I don't think I can do it. Then don't, Maeve replied simply. Stay with me, or let me come with you. I don't care which, as long as we're together. Caleb pulled back slightly, studying her face with wonder. You would do that? Join me in my work? I would, she said with certainty. I've seen what you do, how important it is. I could help. 2 people can accomplish more than one alone. He shook his head, not in denial, but in amazement. You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Maeve Wilson. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing tentative about it. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as her hands slid up to his shoulders and into his hair. The warmth of the fire paled in comparison to the heat building between them. Months of loneliness and years of solitude dissolving in the connection they had found against all odds. Later, as they lay side by side beneath the stars, Caleb's arm serving as her pillow and their hands once again entwined, Maeve felt a sense of rightness that transcended their uncertain circumstances. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. I love you, Caleb whispered into the darkness, the words clearly new and somewhat awkward on his tongue, but no less sincere for it. Maeve turned her head to press a kiss to his jaw. I love you too. Morning found them wrapped in each other's arms, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the aspen leaves to create dappled patterns on their makeshift bed. They prepared for the final leg of their journey with new energy and purpose, the future no longer something to dread, but to anticipate. The terrain gradually became less rugged as they descended toward the valley where Silver Peak was located. By early afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of the town, a bustling settlement nestled against the foothills, its buildings reflecting the prosperity that silver mining had brought to the region. It's larger than I expected, Maeve commented as they paused to survey the town from a vantage point on the trail. It's grown considerably in the last year, Caleb explained. The silver strike was significant. There's a proper hotel now, shops, even a theater. He glanced at her with a smile. Plenty of potential customers for a talented seamstress. They approached the town cautiously, Caleb alert for any sign of lawmen who might have been informed of their description. But the streets were filled only with the normal bustle of a prosperous mining town, miners coming off shift, merchants hawking their wares, ladies in fashionable dresses strolling the boardwalks. The newspaper office was located on the main street, a modest building with Silver Peak Sentinel painted in bold letters across its facade. Caleb tied their horse at the hitching post and helped Maeve down, keeping a protective hand at the small of her back as they entered the building. The interior smelled of ink and paper, with the rhythmic clank of a printing press coming from a back room. A bespectacled man in his 50s looked up from a desk covered in papers, his serious expression transforming into a wide smile when he recognized Caleb. "Preston," he exclaimed, rising to greet them. "Made it in one piece, I see." "More or less," Caleb replied with a grin, clasping the man's hand. "Henry, this is Maeve Wilson. Maeve, meet Henry Donovan, editor and owner of the Silver Peak Sentinel, and a good friend." "Miss Wilson," Henry said, bowing slightly, "I've heard about your situation. Rest assured, you're safe here." "Thank you," Maeve replied, instantly liking the newspaperman's direct manner. "I appreciate your help." Henry gestured for them to follow him to a private office at the back of the building. Once the door was closed, he became all business. "I've prepared the documents you'll need," he said, retrieving a folder from a locked drawer. "Birth certificate, references from previous employers in St. Louis, all consistent with a backstory that can't easily be verified. I've also spoken with Eliza Montgomery about the seamstress position. She's eager to meet you." "Eliza owns the largest dry goods store in town," Caleb explained to Maeve. "Her husband owns controlling interest in the Second Chance mine. She's looking to expand into custom dressmaking," Henry added. "Been sending clients to Denver because there's no one locally with the skills. When Caleb mentioned your background, she practically begged me to bring you to her immediately upon arrival." Maeve felt a surge of hope at the prospect of practicing her craft again. "I'd be delighted to meet with her." "Good," Henry said with satisfaction. "Now, about your living arrangements, I've arranged for a room at the Silver Eagle Hotel for the short term. Once you're settled with employment, you can look for more permanent lodging." He hesitated, glancing between them. "I assumed separate accommodations would be appropriate, but if I've misunderstood your situation—" "Actually, Henry," Caleb interjected, his hand finding Maeve's, "there's been a change of plans. I won't be leaving immediately as we discussed." Henry's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is that so?" "Yes," Caleb confirmed, his grip on Maeve's hand tightening slightly. "I'm staying in Silver Peak, at least for a while." The newspaperman studied them for a moment, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, I can't say I'm entirely surprised. The way you described Miss Wilson in your telegram suggested there was more to your interest than your usual cases." He chuckled at Caleb's slight discomfort. "Don't worry, my friend. Your secret is safe with me." "It's not a secret," Maeve said firmly, returning Caleb's grip with equal pressure. "Caleb and I have decided to build a life together." "In that case," Henry said with a decisive nod, "I'll arrange for a small house instead of hotel rooms. The Johnson place on Elm Street is available for rent. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, small garden, respectable without being ostentatious." "That sounds perfect," Caleb agreed. "Of course," Henry continued with a pointed look, "the good people of Silver Peak would expect a proper marriage before you take up residence together. We're a progressive town, but not that progressive." Maeve felt heat rise to her cheeks. But before she could respond, Caleb spoke. "We intend to marry," he said, his voice steady and sure, "as soon as possible." Henry's smile widened. "Excellent. My wife would never forgive me if I didn't offer our home for the ceremony. Nothing elaborate, but dignified and proper. Say, this Sunday afternoon?" Maeve looked at Caleb in surprise. They had declared their love and agreed to stay together, but the practical matter of marriage hadn't been explicitly discussed. Yet, as their eyes met, she saw nothing but certainty in his gaze. "Sunday would be perfect," she said softly, answering both men at once. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maeve met with Eliza Montgomery, who was indeed desperate for a skilled seamstress and offered her not just employment, but a partnership in a new dressmaking establishment adjacent to the dry goods store. The terms were generous enough that Maeve could purchase the equipment and materials she needed to begin work immediately. Meanwhile, Caleb reconnected with old acquaintances in town and arranged to lease the small house Henry had suggested. By mutual agreement, they took rooms at the hotel until their wedding day, though they spent most of their waking hours together, planning their future. On the third evening, as they walked back to the hotel after dinner at Silver Peak's finest restaurant, Caleb suddenly stopped in the middle of the moonlit street. "I just realized something," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "In all the excitement, I never properly asked you to marry me." Maeve laughed softly. "I think we moved past that formality somewhere between escaping a burning saloon and sleeping under the stars." Still, Caleb insisted, taking both her hands in his. You deserve better than assumptions and arrangements made on your behalf. He sank to one knee right there on the boardwalk, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. Maeve Wilson, I love you with a depth that I never thought possible after losing Rose. You've brought light back into my life and given me a reason to build something beyond my mission. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy sprang to Maeve's eyes. Yes, she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. 1,000 times, yes. Sunday arrived clear and beautiful, as if nature itself approved of their union. The Donovan home was decorated with wildflowers from the surrounding mountains. Anne Henry's wife Martha, a different Martha than the saloon keeper, as Maeve had been amused to discover, had prepared a small but elegant wedding feast. Eliza Montgomery had insisted on gifting Maeve a wedding dress, a simple but beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim that Maeve herself had helped modify to fit perfectly. Caleb, too, looked transformed in a new black suit, his usually windswept hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed close. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Henry's brother, a circuit-riding minister, officiating. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days, Maeve felt the last shadows of her ordeal finally lifting. In their place was a future brighter than any she could have imagined while sitting in chains in that prison wagon. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared to the small gathering of new friends. Mr. Caleb and Mrs. Maeve Preston. As Caleb's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Maeve knew with absolute certainty that their extraordinary beginning was just the first chapter in a long and beautiful story they would write together. The small house on Elm Street quickly became a home filled with love and purpose. Maeve's partnership with Eliza flourished, her designs becoming sought after not just in Silver Peak, but in neighboring towns as well. Within 6 months, they had hired 2 assistants to help meet the demand, and Maeve found herself not just practicing her craft, but teaching it to others. Caleb, for his part, established himself as a guide for legitimate expeditions, geological surveys, hunting parties, and wilderness enthusiasts, but he never abandoned his deeper mission. With Silver Peak as their base, he and Maeve developed a carefully coordinated system for helping those unjustly imprisoned throughout the territories. Their home became a way station of sorts, a place where the rescued could rest, recover, and prepare for new lives elsewhere. Maeve's skills proved invaluable not just in creating disguises through clothing, but in helping traumatized women regain their confidence and sense of self-worth. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Caleb took Maeve's hand and pressed it gently to his lips. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me instead of a simpler existence?" Maeve turned to face him, cupping his cheek with her free hand. "Not for a single moment," she replied truthfully. "How could I regret finding purpose and love in the same breath?" Caleb's eyes, still as intensely blue as the day he'd first looked at her through the bars of that prison wagon, softened with emotion. "Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate I am," he admitted. "I set out to rescue you, but in truth, you rescued me as well." "Perhaps that's the secret," Maeve suggested, leaning in to rest her forehead against his. "Not belonging to each other in chains, but in freedom. Choosing each other every day." "I choose you today," Caleb whispered, echoing the vows they had exchanged, "and all the days to come." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the mountains, Maeve nestled against her husband's side. Content in the knowledge that their journey begun in chains and danger had led them to a love stronger and more enduring than either could have imagined. Together, they had forged not just a life, but a legacy of freedom and justice that would ripple outward for years to come. And if sometimes, in the quiet moments between their missions of mercy and their daily work, they marveled at the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together well, that was just one more blessing to count in their abundant life of purpose and passion. For Maeve, who had once been forced onto a wagon in chains, and Caleb, who had cut them off and claimed her as his own, had discovered the most profound truth of all. True belonging comes not from possession, but from partnership, not from ownership, but but from love freely given and joyfully received. In the wild heart of the western frontier, they had found not just each other, but their shared destiny, a destiny that, like the mountains surrounding their home, would stand strong and enduring through all the seasons of their lives together.